Okay, without further ado, under the motion this House prefers a world with a single global democratic government, I welcome P1 to start the debate. You're here.
Okay, so I'm gonna wait, let me prepare my timer for a while. Okay, I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay, first I would like to define the motion. The democratic government that we mean is a group of people who are working together as a democratic government. And to add to that, we believe that this type of government system has already been from the start, where countries aren't even there yet. So I want to highlight that conflicts may not even happen yet in the first place. And next, our burden is not to prove that the current system is bad, but simply to show that global democratic government is a better option. Therefore, if opposition says otherwise, it should be considered irrelevant. I have two arguments to support this. First is that having a global democratic government reduces conflict between countries, and second, a single global democratic government increases trade and economic efficiency. And now I'll move on to our model. Our model is to show how this works. Uh, is okay. Sorry. Our model is so like this works like nowadays election system where citizens vote. These representatives for every year or maybe 3 to 4 years, according to what they want. And I would like to highlight that the motion clearly states that this is a democratic government, and even after time, the fact that it's a democratic government won't change. Okay, now moving on to my argument. My first argument is that having a global democratic government reduces conflict, and this is true because even though not all laws are identical across all countries, having a single global democratic government allows countries to coordinate on key issues like trade, security, and the environment. This reduces disagreements and prevent clashes of interest between countries because um, these can be resolved in a neutral global way instead of through conflict or war. This is important because fewer conflicts means safer lives for citizens, more stable economies, and less money wasted on military spending. It allows countries to focus on development, education, and healthcare instead of preparing for wars or disputes. So just imagine if the system right now is a democratic government, won't there be less wars, and won't the tax money or all money of all sorts be instead um used to improve like the healthcare system or better education to reduce people in poverty? Won't that be more efficient and more needed for the country instead of wasting it on wars that actually is really simple to solve? An opposition might say that countries can still disagree and conflicts will still happen. But we think that it's unlikely because the global government provides transparent, enforceable mechanisms for dispute resolution, meaning countries cannot ignore agreements without facing clear consequences. And this benefit is exclusive to our side because only a democratically elected global government can provide enforceable coordination at the international level, balancing the national interests while preventing clashes, something current international institutions like the UN or WTO cannot fully achieve. Okay, so now I will be moving on to my second argument. My second argument is that a single global democratic government increases trade and economic efficiency better. A single global democratic government can coordinate the trade, investments, and production more efficiently, allowing countries to export and import without unnecessary barriers like dealing with documents. Like nowadays, we need to deal with documents to trade across countries, or like maybe if there are some policies that we can't trade across countries, we also that is also a barrier for us who wants and needs those trades. With some unified policies and planning, resources can be allocated optimally, reducing waste and increasing overall economic output. And I want to highlight that I said some unified policies. So not all policies are same. Only some of them is same across the countries, and some are different according to what the countries need. Okay, continuing. Because the global government has access to unlimited resources, it can invest in projects, infrastructure, and technology that no single country, like for example Indonesia, could ever afford alone. Especially with the increase of tax, maybe resulting to increase of debt, or even tariffs. For example, imagine a global renewable energy project with solar farms, wind turbines that can be built across continents, across the whole world, using the combined funds from all countries and coordinated labor, ensuring efficient energy distribution worldwide. Won't that just benefit all of us by having more renewable energy? So, this is important because it promotes a stronger global economic growth, higher employment, and better access to and goods and services for people everywhere. Citizens benefit from more stable prices, increased innovation, and improved standards of living. An example of increased innovation is like if we combine all the funds, maybe like if in Indonesia we have destroyed roads or maybe destroyed buildings that
Joy,
really need to be. Yes, please.
how will this distribution happen in the government side?
Okay, so this distribution will happen because we're gonna be electing people from all across the world, right? So like again, this is a group, so they can hear everyone's opinions, and therefore this distribution can be effective immediately. So continuing, as I said, if there are some parts of Indonesia that needs to be renovated, we can use this funds that are combined to renovate each country one by one. An opposition might argue that local governments know their economy best and centralization could slow down decisions, but we think this is unlikely because the global democratic system still allows national representation and elections. So all countries' voices are all heard while benefiting from one coordinated global strategies. And this advantage is only exclusive to our side because no group of separate governments can match the scale, efficiency, and resource access of a single global government, which can pull the expertise, capital, and power worldwide to tackle new problems and grow economies in ways independent national governments never could. And for all these reasons, I'm proud to propose.
All right, I thank P1 for that speech. To open the case of opposition, I welcome O1. Here.
Hello everyone, my name is Anna. My pronouns are she, her. My PR preference is just please unmute yourself and say POI because I will not be checking the Zoom chat box. Okay. Wait, give me a sec. Starting my speech then in 3, 2, 1. So I think the government thinks the world is a utopia with no actual consequences, where suddenly all problems and conflicts on their side will suddenly be solved, or it have never existed in the first place, right? We tell you that this is untrue. We tell you this is extremely untrue and extremely inexclusive. Their arguments are not really inexclusive. So let's talk about their burden of proof, right? They have to state why it's necessarily so much better than status quo, why it's so urgent, and why it's so good, and why we prefer it so much. And we're going to point out why their arguments then aren't exclusive and shouldn't stand, right? So first of all, they say there's a lack of mechanization on their side. Although I value the attempt of trying to provide a mechanization, we think that it's not enough, because what about regional autonomy, right? They haven't really specified on regional autonomy how it would look like, right? So second of all is they said that there are going to be no conflict against between countries, right? or like no conflict at all or no wars at all. But I think that either way, civil war still exists on either side of the house. Civil war is because of the conflict between parties and not necessarily between countries, right? So I think when they say that there's going to be no wars, there's going to be nothing at all, no conflict at all between countries or between areas. It's simply just it's inexclusive at all, right? Because they cannot prove that civil wars doesn't happen on either side of the house, right? Because we tell you
Okay,
that civil
POI.
still, yeah, sure.
At first, I already defined the motion as this is the type of government which is already in the first place where there are no countries and therefore there is no conflict yet.
Again, I think that even if it's a single unified government from the very beginning, where there are no countries, and it has always been like this for centuries and centuries to come, I think conflict between parties will still exist either way because you can't guarantee that. It's within human nature to fight. Like it's within human nature to necessarily like fight against each other. Like conflict between parties still exists on their side, right? Because it's not that suddenly, if you implement their side of the house with a global government, it's not that suddenly no wars will exist or no conflict will exist between people, right? Because that still exists, right? So I think about their saying about the resource and budget allocation on wars, I don't think countries specifically do budget allocations on wars, but they do invest in defense in and of itself, right? So I think that on our side, it's not that suddenly like you don't have to invest anything in defense at all because that's going to be ineffective, right? So I think when they say that it's going to be more effective because you can invest more in healthcare because there will be no wars at all, it's extremely idealistic. And the fact that you still need to invest in your own country's defense, right, in your own regional defense as well, right? Because like if you're a robbery or if you're like something, right? So I think that is why their first argument doesn't stand there. Their second argument is about efficiency. Then I'll elaborate this on my first argument, but I think the main point is about economic growth. So I think on our side, there's still programs that do that as well. There's still trade between countries. So I don't understand the exclusivity then, because there's still economic help from international groups. There's still going to be trading, and like in status quo, right? We can see that there's still international connections. It's not that like we're just going to be singled off as a country, but I think you still, as a country, you do have international relations with other countries. So I don't see the urgency and why it's so good and exclusive on your side then, and hence why they fail to prove it, and hence why we win. So moving on to my first argument then. First is, why is their side bad? It is the lack of global checks and balances. Less existence of global checks and balances on their side then. I.e., if you want to do something as a country, you got to consider what other countries think of your country then. But this kind of checks and balances basically does not exist on the government side then, because there's no other government that is, or no leading other major organization that holds similar power to even hold you accountable as a government if you make the wrong decisions or you make decisions that only benefit you, because now they're the single most powerful. And even if the government comes in and say, no, this won't happen because it's a democracy, the balance of power is still unlikely to be very good. And people realize the wrongs of such government might do is a lot harder to untie with the entire humanity who for thousands of years have had the conflict, or after conflict with each other suddenly agree together and work and fix it, right? So I think the checks and balances on the government side is really hard to prove and guarantee that. It gives so much power to the democratic governments, officials, members of the parliament then, because of the fact that there's no other necessarily check and balance them, right? On our side, we have other countries to check and balance you. For example, if Indonesia just does something that's like bluntly against human rights, we have the UNHRC to remind us, right? We have the UN, we have the other countries. We have an association that constantly checks and balances. So I think so what's to say that their side won't create an oligarchy of these parliament members, right? When they have all the power without checks and balances, we can see that corruption is already very prominent, even as per country then. So I think that this is why we win, because there's a lack of global check and balance on their side. Then the procedures are going to be really long, and there's going to be no regional autonomy. I think we can say that with a worldwide global autonomy then, procedures are going to take a really, really long time, especially when you say that, i.e. the capital or central is going to be like the USA, and it's going to take a long time for development or decision making to reach someplace like Indonesia. So less regional autonomy then. I think what will happen then is civil war or terrorism. Just like of course, what will happen between people and the government. Like we see in the history of Indonesia, where we just started off as a country, right? Where because people didn't think that we were giving enough regional autonomy to the other areas outside of Java, they revolted, right? So I think that civil war will still happen on our side then. See, it's going to be really messy on their side, and it's going to be really redundant, right? We have to prove to us why their side is so urgent and why it cannot be done on our side, right? We tell that this has been how status quo works for centuries, and it has proven well, and it has been okay for this long, right? We saw that there's other organizations, international organizations that exist in the first place, right? So it's different cultural beliefs. I think you need to understand the fact that in status quo, people have a lot of different cultural norms in and of itself, right? What to say that these cultural identities won't be erased or won't be compromised by bigger or more popular cultures then, especially when you assume the identity of one nation, right? I think we can see that even in status quo in Indonesia, we can see that a lot of cultures are being wiped or erased or compromised by other cultures, right? I think in Indonesia, Javanese culture is being really prominent to others outside of Java. It's not really right. So I think, i.e., if everyone speaks English instead of Bahasa Indonesia, Javanese, etc., like these cultures are going to be wiped out. Or if it's, as they say, where it has been like this forever and no countries have existed. So what's to say that cultures won't even exist in the first place, right? There's no national identity. There's no form of national pride, right? So, or if everything happened on their side, I don't think culture will exist in the first place. And what makes one country or one part unique of something? You have no background. You have no identity of you, yourself. Right. So I think this is going to be really bad on their side because it's just going to erase cultures, right? It's just going to make it that everyone is the same from one nation without like any national pride or national identity, right? So I think this is going to be really bad then. So second argument then, why is our side good then? And why is our side still better than their side, right? A specifically only proves to you the fact that the international organizations and bodies will still exist on our side. UN, EU, AU, ASEAN, etc. We tell you that bilateral and multilateral collaboration can still exist on our side as well. Therefore, not exclusive in our arguments, right? Trade between countries can still happen on our side. Resource allocation can still happen on our side, right? So, and because of that, there's also a better check and balance. And if they want to say that international law does not exist on our side, it still exists on our side. International law that is signed by countries still exists on our side. I think even if you violate a UNSC charter, a UN law, I think the UNSC will give you sanctions, or other countries will sanction you, or other countries will like stop trade with you if you as a government do something wrong or like commit a human right violation, right? So in our side, there's actually check and balance, right? On their side, there's none. So there's still check and balance, and I would even say there's more of check and balance on our side comparatively. They don't, right? So I think that's why our side still wins against them. And B, we have a national identity and background in which everyone can have their own culture, they're proud of their own language, etc. That would not have existed on their side, right? And C, regional sovereignty and autonomy of different countries then are going to be essentially different, and it's going to be like according to each country, right? Like even if they say that policies, some policies may work for everything, some policies may not. I think it's going to be like a bit ineffective, right? Because I think either way, all the countries are going to be different, right? So you need like a lot of policies then, right? And again, regional autonomy, right? I think D is global level scale is going to be, again, we win on the fact that checks and balances will still exist on our side, and the fact that they have not really identified an urgency, or why it's so much better on their side. Because when we prove to you the fact that their arguments are extremely inexclusive, especially the ones about civil wars and conflicts. That is all for my speech, then thank you.
All right, thank you, Owen, for that speech. To continue the case of proposition, I welcome P2. You're here.
Okay, am I audible?
Yep, audible.
Okay, and my POI preference is through chat. Okay, so I will begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Opposition has given rebuttals on first our argument on conflict resolution, and second on our argument about economic efficiency. First, they claim that regional autonomy and civil wars still exist on our side, and a single global government won't eliminate conflicts. Now, here's the thing. A federated global democracy can balance first regional autonomy with central oversight of cross-border or international disputes. Civil wars are usually local. Central authority, however, can prevent this escalation into international conflicts, which are far more deadlier. Local autonomy through this way is maintained, but global peace is prioritized because that's where stakes are highest. Even if some small-scale civil wars persist, the overall scale of violence and human suffering is still drastically reduced, which fulfills our promise of easier conflict resolution on a global scale. Now, on their rebuttal on our economic efficiency, they say that trade already exists in status quo, and why is this urgent? Now, here's the thing: trade exists, but national policies that are fragmented create inefficiency and inequality. A global government, however, can optimize production, resource allocation, and response to crisis. More on that on my argument later, which reduces wasted resources and ensures everyone benefits equitably. Even if some trade already functions, coordination at a global level avoids delays, inequality, which trade that is fragmented cannot solve. Efficiency is not about the existence of trade, but maximizing the benefit of and and minimizing waste. Now, I like to rebut to their first argument, in which they say that we have a lack of checks and balances. They claim that a single global government has no other organization to keep in check, and there's a risk of abuse of corruption. However, a global democracy can still implement built-in checks and balances through first elections, judicial review, and regional councils. Power is not distributed and monitored globally, and this is not concentrated in one elite. Even if no system is perfect, but global accountability mechanisms combined with participation from democratic participation massively reduces the risk of unchecked abuse compared to the governments that are fragmented, that hide corruption locally. Now, I would like to rebut the second argument, in which they say that there is a risk of erasing there is a risk of erasing cultural identities. A single global democratic government does not eliminate local or regional cultures, because policies can be federated, allowing the regional governments to manage cultural, religious, and practices freely, while the global government handles issues of global importance, like, for example, peace, human rights, climate, and economy. Global governance is about coordination, not about uniformity. So even if some global standards slightly constrain local practices, the benefits of preventing conflict and managing crisis outweigh minor standardization. Culture diversity can thrive within a globally coordinated framework. Now, I would like to move on to my extension, in which in which that it would be easier in responding in global crisis. First, currently, individual governments respond to crisis independently, which often leads to first delayed or unequal action. Policies can vary around across nations, across these nations in status quo, which creates inefficiency and can leave vulnerable populations unprotected. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the distribution of vaccines were uneven. Wealthier nations secured doses faster, while poorer countries struggled, despite also having the same urgent need. A single global democratic government could implement policies that ensures that resources, expertise, and aid are deployed where they are most needed, regardless of national borders. So even if countries attempt a voluntary cooperation in status quo, there are differing political priorities, economic competition, which makes the coordinate global action slow. Now, second mechanism. Current international organizations like World Health Organization or United Nations frameworks provide a guidance but cannot enforce compliance of it. Countries can ignore these agreements without immediate consequences. For example, during negotiations about climate change, some nations fail to meet targets about, let's say, carbon emissions, which delay progress. A single global democratic government ensures that there can be enforcement, and that ensures there can be enforcement. This means that decisions can be legitimized with oversight over how the allocation of resources and how we respond to the crisis. So, and even if international bodies in status quo aim for fairness, their lack of legal power and enforcement still limits effectiveness of it, which leaves a crisis unresolved and some population at risk. Now, for the impacts. First, there would be life saved and reduced human suffering. Coordinate reaction ensures that emergency resources reach those who need them fastest and prevents unnecessary death. Similarly, coordinate disaster relief, like earthquakes or floods, would reduce suffering and recovery time overwide. So, and even if some nations act responsibly on their own in status quo, global uncoordinated action globally still cannot match the efficiency or speed of a unified government response in our propositions world. Now, second impact. Crisis can cause economic shocks, especially when countries respond inconsistently. A centralized management, however, reduces uncertainty and prevents collapse of supply chains, which allows economies to adapt rapidly. So even if inside the school, regional alliances manages some crises, uncoordinated efforts leaves gaps in protection and trust, which limits global trade and collaboration. Now, for the comparative, in Proposition's world, a single global democratic government reduces rapid reduces rapid and reduces rapid and coordinated action. Resources are allocated effectively, and populations are protected regardless of these borders between nations and regardless of the differing nations. Now, there would be a trust in the government, trust in the system, which grows as outcomes become more visible and tangible, rather than relying on voluntary cooperation solely. Now, however, in opposition's role, national governments can act independently, leading, which leads to delays, unequal access, and fragmented policies. International institutions rely on voluntary compliance, which means that crisis may worsen due to political disagreements. Even if some nations respond effectively, global outcomes can still remain inconsistent, and vulnerable populations can still suffer. And therefore, I'm proud to propose.
All right, thank you, Pito, for that speech. Now, to continue the case of opposition, I welcome O2. You're here.
Okay, so I will be the second speaker for opposition side, and my POI first is just to unmute since I will be looking at the Zoom call, and my pronouns are just she and her. And let me set my timer first. Okay, I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Now I would like to first of all start with some rebuttals first. Now, government team has been repeating and been saying about on their side they will remove overpowering of some countries. I would like to say that this is untrue. This will still happen on their side because imagine one of the government is from America and one is from Indonesia. Even if they put it in the same country, they all have their own backgrounds and entities. And let's just say one of the governments from America and one of them is from Indonesia. In the government itself, who has the higher stance? Of course, the American government. Therefore, the Indonesian government has a lower stance. Therefore, that inequality of stance in the government still happens on their side, even if they bring every single country of them to become one country. Sorry. And they keep saying about unequal access, and I would like to say that it won't actually work on their side, and I will later explain that later on into my arguments. Now, I would first of all say that there's no urgency on their side. There's no urgency on their side because we have explained plenty of times that the fact that the solution that seems to be heaven on government side can still create harms the same way on our side, and they can actually create worse or harms or harms that are even worse. With different cultures and more unfairness on their side, there will be more harms, and we have explained that our harms, that their harms are even worse than the status quo with this single government. Now, I would like to say that by making a one single government, it's hard to keep it makes this one single government hard to keep up with everything in globally, because everyone has different cultures, everyone has different backgrounds. Therefore, if it's in the government, if there's one single government, that means that one single government has to focus on all the cultures and all the backstories of every single place, on every single mainland, every single of those previous countries, and to make things work in globally, and to make things to make sure that nobody's left out. But this will not happen because no one, not even the government, not even that one single government, can focus on all cultures and what all those cultures need. Then it makes it hard for the government to take care of everything, since on the government side that they want to make everything globally into a single country. Therefore, with different and plenty of cultures in this world right now, it makes it hard for one single government to actually therefore one single government to actually like keep up and take care of every single country. Therefore, there will actually be countries that are going to be left out because not that one single government knows about their cultures or resources or what they actually need. Therefore, there will be some countries that will be left out from the single government stuff and will actually lose and will not actually be focused by the single government. Therefore, it creates a sense of unfairness for those countries who actually get left out from the government itself, and therefore it creates it will actually create a sense of unfairness for those countries who will get left out. Now, I would like to say that about enforcement of global mechanisms. In status quo, checks and balances do exist. Like if you want to violate UNSC charter, if you want to commit war crimes, or like if you want to do something really, really bad, then people are going to sanction you. Countries are going to avoid doing trade with you, and etc. etc. That's what happened in the status quo right now. Therefore, check and balance still happens on our side. So there's really no urgency to actually create one single government. Like sanctions still exist on our side, and consequences do exist on our side. Therefore, there's really no urgency to make one single government when it can actually create more harms on the government side. What's to say that the regional bodies on their side won't necessarily ignore climate change? Then there's no guarantee or exclusivity on their side. But even if that's not the case, then even if that's not the case, the harms on their side still on government side it still creates more harms. Now I would like to add more extensions about the fact that now government side has been stating a lot about conflict and about the fact that now with the single government, it can make it seem like there won't be any civil wars because we're all governed by one government, or it's just the entire country. Or I should say that they prevent more conflicts between countries. Government explains about the fact that they cannot start conflicts because the government will be transparent about it. That is untrue, because even on their side, civil wars can still happen. Now, how can this happen? Well, of course, because of those rules, basically like saying that even within a country they have a government. Let's just say a country, let's just say a democratic country. Even within a democratic country that has a government, their citizens can still fight, can still make conflicts, and the government cannot control that. Sure, they can give sanctions, but conflicts between the world and conflicts within globally, when there's one single government, can still happen because of all of different backstories and different cultures and etc. and many more. Therefore, conflicts on their side can still happen and that it's basically the same as the status quo right now. So why is the urgency to actually create one single government? Now, with a single government, it can make it seem like it can make resources distribution more equally globally, as what government side has been stating plenty of times. And the government can take electives from all over the world that can give the resources and spread it around the world equally. Sure, this looks like a great solution, looks like heaven. Now, I would like to say that this will not work because it can create a sense of unfairness. Can you imagine if you're China that has worked hard to get resources and to get money for their people, for their mainland? Suddenly, the global government asked them to give resources to those countries who needs it. Like, of course, if you were China, you would feel like it's something that's unfair. Because how come you work so hard for all those stuff, and suddenly those countries who need it suddenly get it for free? Gets your hard work, gets the thing that you work hard for free. And it could also be a case where lazy countries who doesn't want to do work for resources suddenly get great resources from the global government, from those countries who actually work hard to gain these resources for their mainland itself. Now, in that case, it creates a sense of unfairness on government side, and with the sense of unfairness, it can create conflict. Therefore, it's also therefore stating again, it making it untrue that when government said there won't be conflict on their side. Where there's unfairness, there will be conflict. As we can see in the world right now, everywhere we go, where there's unfairness, there is conflict. Because imagine you and your friend, let's say not your friend, let's say you and another person in your class is being treated unfairly. Let's just say you're being treated unfairly, and then the other you guys are being treated unfairly, and the other one is being treated with more, let's say more benefits. Let's say in a test, like you didn't cheat, but your friend cheated, and then suddenly you were stated that you cheated. That creates a sense of unfairness, and therefore from this you can actually create conflict, because you will of course argue with the government, which is the teacher who blamed you for cheating, and therefore it creates conflict. Not only that, but unfairness from the global government, which is of course getting resources from those who have high resources to those who need it, can actually create conflict between the citizens of globally with this global government itself. Therefore, it creates a sense of conflict between the two of them, and that is something that is harmful, because then the global government will lose its voice towards globally itself and create more conflicts. But on our side, it creates a more fair system where those countries who need resources to actually work hard and actually get those resources themselves. And just like what my first speaker said, trades within resources can still happen on our side when both sides think it's a fair, and it still can happen on our side. It can still happen when one country can make a trade with other country and they agree with it because they think it's fair and it's beneficial for them. Therefore, there's more fairness on our side and there's more unfairness on their side. And I would like to state that on our side, they don't have to they don't have to follow one single government, and if the country needs other rules, it can actually not follow the government and actually make their own rules. Therefore, it creates. Therefore, that's all for my speech, and I'm proud to oppose.
All right, thank you, Otto, for that speech. To close the substantive speeches from Team Government, I welcome P3. Here.
Okay, hello, am I audible?
Yep, you're all right. Thank you, P3, for that speech. Now, to close the substantive speeches from both teams, I welcome O3. Here.
All right, hold on. Let me set my notes on my timer. Okay, so firstly, before I start, good evening to dear adjudicating panel, members of both government and opposition teams. My name is Nadine, and today, of course, I will be speaking, of course, as the whip for the opposition team. All right, so then my speech will start in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so now allow me to start my speech with responding and rebutting some of the points that the government has brought against us. Okay, so firstly, when it comes to resource allocation still exists on our side. I think what the government fails to understand is it's not like in status quo all the resources are it's not like that all the resources are centralized to only one area, i.e. Indonesia, right? I think other countries also buy our resources in general, right? So I think there's no urgency to change our side or like harm on our side, right? Because resource allocation is not something done by government. It's of course done by trade. So if you as a developed country want to purchase from developing countries, because that's the way trade works, trade isn't done by like the government moving one resource from one side to another. It's done by trade and purchase. And even if it's a democratic government, it has a democratic principle. If you kind of prove the fact that there is still going to be check and balance, right? Especially without international pressure. I.e., when Indo has had human rights violation, again, as we've stated before, UN Heritage spoke up to warn about it. And since Indo as a country doesn't want to be antagonized, they changed like i.e. they brought back TikTok flag, which we have proven. We win when you tell that they have provided no likelihood that wars will not exist on their side too, on the other point, on their side, because wars stem from conflict of interest as parties and humans, not as countries or governments solely, right? We told you that civil wars will exist because of conflict of interest either way, and it's within human nature basically to have conflicts. And okay, next, the whole point about culture and how they said that, culture basically there won't be conflicts because of culture and conflicts with them. But culture again is a way of life, and it's also provides a very different ideology between people. And this does not get discounted by government. Differences still happen because of different areas they were born in, your background, how you were raised, what ideals you were raised with, and history. It doesn't mean everyone has the same place. You cannot like ignore there. There will still be differences. So you cannot credit their point on this because it's simply untrue and it does not work whatsoever. Because culture can still create conflicts because it's an entire difference on how you act and what you want and what your ideals are. So that can still create conflicts, right? They also agreed with our side that the harms on our side happens on our side. Therefore, what is the urgency on their side to create one single government? Nothing, because just like my second and my first speaker has said, the fact that different backstories, different habits need different needs, and therefore with one single government, they can make a decision that can connect or apply to all those habits as well. Meanwhile, everyone has such different backgrounds, right? Okay, next, what about government is neglecting culture? That is untrue because even if you're a single country, you can still have a different background and different culture past. Therefore, with different cultures and different backstories, there will fight because their identity is different. How could this conflict even still happen? Because with less similarity in their backstories and it makes it harder for them to relate and to go with one rule. Therefore, of course, it can still create conflict. So, okay, then there is no proof. We have never stated about how conflicts on their side can still happen or explain how it will happen, right? That's what they say, kind of like. But like already, my second speakers already explained so much on detail on how conflict will still happen on their side because of mainly conflict of interest and conflict of backgrounds. Because conflict is still gonna be bound to happen. I can of course explain to worse when there's a lot of people who agree with either side. So then conflicts still happen, and you cannot just prove that conflicts won't happen because that is simply impossible. Because conflicts still happen every day, even on the streets, and it's just bound to be able to explode. So you really cannot say. So the government just really cannot say that conflicts will not happen and whatsoever because that's just not how the world works, right? Okay, next let's carry on to my first clash then. Okay, what's better for the people of the earth here in this world? Okay, but before I continue on this clash, let's go back to our characteristics and actor analysis. What is the single global government? It's like uniting so many different people and countries that have had different backgrounds and make like 8 billion people get united into getting led but a single government controls the whole wide world, which we believe again is way too much power to be put on a single organization without external help, right? And even if it's democratic, we can see that even in status quo, maybe many, if not all, democratic countries still have a ton of issues when it comes to power play of their governments. Like almost every single democratic government still has issues of power, such as corruptions, even when it's so democratic. So democracy is not like a one size fits all solution, right? So, and then what do the citizens want? They also want what is best for their areas and have them well taken care of alongside with their people, and want to live under a government that represents them. So what has the government been saying in this regard? They claim that welfare for the people will be better because it will be easier to spread resources, right? And make the welfare of the people better, right? I mean, we said it's kind of unfair, no? Like my second speaker has said about the China example, where it's kind of unfair where they get it for free. You know, as I've stated, trading can still happen regardless on both sides, and actually push economic and help each other here be able to work. Trading does not rely on government; it relies on the people, and hoarding they brought up just doesn't really make sense. It goes smoothly through interest and demand, not forced by the government. That just doesn't make sense, right? Our people now also can stay with their people and be able to choose a leader with their own ideologies, right? And basically have a leader who listens to them better because you're part of the like 50 million precious people they rule, not something like 8 billion, and you might not even have a similarity in life, a single one, with your leader. So what they're saying is really not exclusive when it comes to the welfare of the people, because we really argue that, well, life would be so much better on our side because you have actually something similar or have with your leaders, and because when it comes to resources, it's still a lot better when you trade. And sure, I might say trade is external said, but trade is not really influenced by the government, but it's still a lot influenced by the existence of countries, because it's like, oh, I need this, I need that, so I trade with this country, right? Meanwhile, who are you going to trade? Who are you going to trade with when everyone is controlled under one government, right? So it just makes trade a bit harder, and it's basically just redundant on their side, right? So now let's carry on to the other main conflict. What's better for the stability of the globe? They claim that on their side, in which the world throughout the whole time was all united in a country, there would be no conflict ever, and everything would be happy, and everyone would be happy with each other, and ride off into the sunset of everlasting peace. And then the earth would be more stable with funds now used for other things that are not conflicts. We say that even if the whole world was united in a certain country and governments, conflict could still happen, because conflict does not only happen because of governments, but also, of course, by people as well. You can see this in countries today in status quo as well, where the people inside a single country still have conflicts over cultural differences. This can blow up even larger when you see it's from huge areas that are now called countries, and in their world would just be part of the same governance, right? So war is not discounted on their side, even it could stem for more when a democracy doesn't guarantee everyone agrees on a leader. Let's say it's a something like a majority vote, right? And the leader won by like, well, let's say 60%, and the other is 40, and the other one got 40%. Chances are the 40% who voted for them might not just accept it, right? Especially if it's like a really big issue it's over. And it could also lead to wider conflict, because now the 40%, it's not just like a few million as would happen normally in like smaller countries. Suddenly, like, it's billions of people when you look at the population of the world, right? Moreover, the government, moreover, as we stated before, and the government side of the house has not even responded that much or like proven to us more about check and balance. More the government has no check and balance, actually using their power beneficially with being free from corruption or things like that. So conflict of interest, of course, still happens either way. So we have already proven time and time again that conflicts still happen. So their side is just entirely redundant, right? Okay, so now why do we win? Because we prove the likelihood here by using examples from status quo and showing how it will happen in real life and what has already happened, right? Meanwhile, they have no guarantee on their stance and ideas here, and only briefly touched and responded on us, right? Moreover, they only work on their best case scenario. Meanwhile, we've engaged right on their case. We stated that even if we worked in their best case scenario where all the countries are peaceful with no conflict, right, there's still probably gonna be a lack of check and balance for the government to actually be able to focus on every single area under their own jurisdiction with equal effort. A reminder that is 8 billion people with no external help, right? So even in their best case scenario, of course, it's still gonna be a lot harder on their side. So it becomes redundant as well when all of their problems, all of their benefits could still be brought in the status quo where countries are all divided into different governments. And for all of those reasons and more, that is why we, as the opposition side of the House, win this debate. Thank you for listening to my speech.
All right, thank you, Audrey, for that speech. Now to the replies. I welcome a reply. Here.
Hello everyone, I'm going to be Thai. I'm going to start my speech then in 3, 2, 1. Again, when I say that the government team lives in a utopia where it does not exist, the benefits on their side will not be achieved, and their arguments are really redundant and really, really inexclusive, right? So let's talk about the first thing they preach then. They preach that they win, that the conflict, the clash about conflict, about wars, right? But when we tell you the fact that it won't suddenly just be when you're in the government world, when you're in like a global one nation as like a globe, it won't suddenly be that all conflicts, all wars will cease to exist. Because when we tell you that conflicts happen from party to party, it doesn't really exclusively happen from nation to nation, right? When we tell you that, it's not that suddenly like you don't really have to invest in security as a nation at all, and you can invest it all in healthcare and stuff like that. It won't happen, right? Because you as a government, you still need to invest in security, you still need to invest in the well-being of your people, and I think that civil wars is still going to exist. So when they preach about conflict and conflict and conflict, we tell you that it is extremely inexclusive, and either way, conflict will still exist on our side. And the fact that on our side, we have bodies like UNSC, we have bodies like international bodies that specifically help the world, the status quo. For example, when there's a conflict, when there's a war, you get international pressure from other countries to stop this war, right? When we tell you that there is enough mechanizations on our side that either way, it's still inexclusive, extremely exclusive. So I think when their burden is to prove why their side is better, and they provide you argument with wars that won't happen on their side, it's extremely inexclusive and it shouldn't stand at all, right? So second clash then about the resource allocation, this is the second argument, right? I think they don't really understand where you get resources from, because I think when you resource allocation is not resource allocation is done by trade, right? It's not that suddenly the government takes oil from Indonesia and gives it to America, right? No, but America buys oil from Indonesia, right? Because the fact that that's how trade works, the fact that you purchase the oil in Indonesia, the fact that you do trade from developing countries to country to country in and of itself, either your developing country or your developed country, trade will still exist on our side, especially with the international organizations like WCO or IMF. Trade will still exist on either side of the house. So when they preach about resource allocation, we just simply do not understand this argument with the fact that trade still exists on our side, and that's the way that trade has always worked, and even on their side, that's the way that trade is going to work in and of itself, right? So this, and I think they fail to prove their main burden there about urgency, and when we have proved to you that their side is extremely redundant and extremely inexclusive, why then would you really prefer a world with a global government? Why then would you prefer a world with one single government when you cannot even preach any exclusive arguments about it then? I think you as a government has no right to say that suddenly development will be so much better. There's going to be no rural areas. Everything's going to be equal, etc., etc. Because it's not how development works, right? We have pointed out again and again that you as a government cannot preach exclusivity on how suddenly the world will be so much better, as if it will be heaven on your side, because you're living in an utopia, right? Because that's not how the world works, right? It's not that suddenly with a global government all problems will be fixed, right? We tell you that it's just not exclusive, right? Because if it was so easy, then all the countries would have done it, right? So I think our side still wins to you the fact that when we prove to you that there are more check and balance mechanisms on our side, namely the UN, namely that if you do like war crimes, then the UN is going to boycott you, the UN is going to sanction you, the other countries won't trade with you, the fact that there is still a check and balance on our side, and it's a very real check and balance, right? The fact that it's not that the fact that if you do commit war crimes, it's not that suddenly you're gonna have no sanctions at all. No, because the UN will sanction you, and that's the way that UN works. That's the way that international organizations work. The fact that international organizations still work on our side, the fact that international trade still exists on our side, it's not that suddenly that each country is going to be excluded in their own world or in their own country with no outside connection at all. The fact that international trade, international relations still happen on our side, right? So I think they have not really rebutted on the fact that when we tell you that there's going to be less check and balance, no matter if they're a democratic country, even if they are going to do something wrong, because just because you're a democratic country doesn't mean that you won't make any mistakes at all, or you will do suddenly all the right decisions, right? The fact that you cannot guarantee without checks and balances from other countries as well. So that's why we are going to win this debate. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Reply. To close the debate as a whole, I welcome Prop Reply. Here.
Okay, I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. In this debate, the proposition side has clearly shown and proven why a global democratic government would be better. This debate should be judged on which side better ensures smooth decision making, fair coordination between countries, and long-term stability. We have proven that our systems allow countries to coordinate effectively, reduce clashes, and manage global resources efficiently, while the opposition failed to show how separate governments with checks and balances can do this better. I have two main clashes. two main clashes for this. First clash, we'll be talking about efficiency and conflict reduction. The opposition argued that global democratic government would be less efficient because it has to consider many countries, has checks and balances, might erase cultural identities, and trade would still exist with sanctions if rules are broken. They also claim that our system would be messy, but we have already proven the urgency of the trade, as we said in our third speaker. Countries have different needs and specialties, so trade will still be happening. And our side has proven that even with many countries, decisions are made through democratic votes every year or 3 to 4 years on. And all countries have a voice, and disputes are resolved in a natural way rather than slow negotiations or conflict. This is said in our first argument. And if you don't buy this, we also said again and again in our first and third speaker speeches that no countries even exist yet, and the opposition didn't decline this definition, so this argument falls, and other arguments linked to this also falls. And next, the opposition said check and balances would slow things down or make the system messy. Actually, structured democratic procedures reduces conflict and keep countries accountable. The global government can make decisions faster than separate countries constantly arguing. We have proven why this isn't true, and also proven in our third speaker speech how check and balances are instead better on our side. So this argument also falls. Next, they argued that cultural identities would be lost, but countries can keep their traditions, laws, and representation while still coordinating on trade, security, and environmental issues. So the culture remains safe, and yes, there is still background difference, but at least it's not as big of a difference in their side. In schools, people also have different backgrounds from the same country, as you said. So, what's the difference? Even if civil wars or conflicts happen, our side is better because under one government, these can be managed more effectively. And yes, corruption can happen, but it's less likely in our system because the government has an incentive for peace and good image. And in separate countries, only their own country watches them, but in our world, the world watches, so the government is less likely to act badly. And trade will still happen because countries have different needs and specialties. The opposition won't engage with check and balances. We already explained why they exist and why they work better in our system. And only our model coordinates efficiently, prevent clashes, and respects each country's voice. Therefore, in this clash, the opposition case falls. Second clash, we'll be talking about crisis management and global coordination. The proposition said that a single global democratic government can handle crisis better, like distributing vaccines fairly or giving disasters aid quickly. They argued this saves lives, protect economies, and gets help to the right places fast. The opposition says that even with a global government, countries might still disagree. Some cultures could be ignored. People may protest, and unfairness could happen. They also argue that sanctions and trade already keep countries in check. First, this isn't true because, as our first argument says, because of a global democratic government, let's say every country have a voice. Decisions are made fairly, so help gets delivered fast and more evenly than when each country acts on its own. And this is important because coordinated action saves life, protects economies, and builds trust between nations. Fragmented responses make crisis even worse. And therefore, in this clash, opposition falls, and for all these reasons, we're proud to propose.
All right, thank you, Prop Reply. That marks the end of the debate. Thank you, both teams. It was an interesting and fun debate. Thank you, Triple Raccoon. Thank you, 667. So you guys can now leave the breakout room while waiting for the closing ceremony. So yeah. So